Hello and welcome to the show. Now, one of the most important issues that we discussed on this channel, in fact, in my mind, the most important issue of our time, has been the basic 20-year scandal, 25-year scandal of the so-called grooming gangs, possibly better expressed as rape gangs. Now, there's a man who has been campaigning about these and tried to expose quite what has been going on for a long time. He's with me today. His name is Raja Miah. Raja, we've been seeing you quite a lot on, podcasts and channels like this recently, talking about the problem. But I think it's fair to say that that's quite a recent thing. Have you found it hard to get the story out during that whole period?
Started 6 years ago, and the people who I picked the baton up from, Peter, one of them's now passed away. His name is Warren Bates, and he'd been trying for 10 years, the best part of 10 years before that. So we've been, in my town, we've been on this journey now for, I'd say, about 15 years or so.
15 years, yeah. And this is a kind of rather esoteric question, but if you can maybe just comment on it. During that period, there is such a thing, isn't there, as local press. What is their attitude been to what must have come, into their ambit, surely?
They are partners. They are partners in the cover-up, and that's something I've come to no other conclusion other than that. I've spoken with survivors who've gone to the press.
Yeah.
I've spoken with politicians who've gone to the press.
Yep.
I've spoken with parents and local community members who've been to the press, and consistently they've been nothing but partners in the cover-up. And it's best demonstrated, I think, through the actions of not just the local newspapers, but through the actions of the local BBC Northwest.
Yes.
Is the sort of division of the BBC where I come from. And there was is a man still, senior political correspondent in BBC Northwest called Kevin Fitzpatrick. And Kevin Fitzpatrick, in the dossier of emails I released, was involved in conspiring with the leader of the council at the time, now MP, Minister for Local Government, a man called Jim McMahon, and they conspired with each other to keep this news of grooming gangs operating in my town out of the public sphere. So the local press have been historically partners in this. And I looked at it and I tried to make sense of it. And I've gone on my own journey to try and understand why. It wasn't to maintain community relations. There was always this narrative of we need to maintain community relations, as though people from my background weren't just as horrified at these grooming gangs. In fact, the email that we leaked, involving Kevin Fitzpatrick and Jim McMahon whilst he was leader of the council, and copied in a whole host of people in the council and the police. Within that email, it's made very clear that it was the community, it was people from the Asian community who had gone to the BBC, hoping the BBC would do something because they'd been to the council and the police wouldn't do anything. So as a last resort, they'd gone to the press, and what the local press did was conspire with those they'd already been to keep the news out, hidden.
Is it purely this has always been my experience with most of our local media, is it politically they're simply not on side?
I think a combination of there's a cozy arrangement, I think, in terms of a lot of how the funding works, and the local press is dependent upon both the goodwill of the local councils to get the information from the comms teams, as well as the adverts and stuff. I think you see in a publication such as The Guardian, they're so reliant on advertising contracts for jobs and stuff that, it's skewed a certain way. So there's definitely that. As I got into it, it became more and more clear. This is political ideology.
Yeah.
The local press is, on the whole, I describe them as fake liberal, metropolitan elite. They're from the outer South Manchester districts, Charlton, Didsbury, nice, well-to-do areas, and they can look down on in particular, they look down on the white working class with complete contempt and see people like me in a very narrow way, where we should be thankful that we have these, we have them to look after us, and we should have a particular mindset. So they are ideologically aligned with the left.
Yeah. I mean, because, I spoke about it recently. I was at Oxford actually doing one of their debates and spoke about it from the point of view of multiculturalism. I think it was Dennis McShane,
Okay.
who was once Labour MP for Rochdale, said in an interview some years later, said, I think there was the feeling that we shouldn't rock the multicultural boat. That was what he said. But of course, what I've been reading about what you've done and hearing you is actually piecing together this extraordinary network that have basically allowed this to go on. I mean, it's quite complicated, isn't it? But when did you first have any inkling that something was terribly wrong?
When I got arrested. When the first time I got arrested, and I knew it had been completely fabricated, and I'm like thinking, wow, so this is how far this has got.
Yeah.
This isn't just a series of mistakes. This isn't just an individual here in one place covering something up this is systemic. And the way in which the police operates in Greater Manchester is there's a Greater Manchester Mayor. His name's Andy Burnham. He has delegated powers to someone else, but he's responsible for the police. Is the Police and Crime Commissioner is his official responsibility, and then the Labour Party controlled police forces hammering down my door, a dawn raid, 8 of them dragging me out my house, and it was purely political. It was because I'm not a criminal, and something like that had never happened to me. I was in my late 40s at that time, and they're dragging me out of my house. My neighbour's looking perplexed at what's going on here in a dawn raid, and I'm like thinking, no, this has now got dangerous. This is no longer anything to do with one isolated case or something that's gone wrong in one small instance. This is systemic.
Yeah, yeah. Have you been threatened since? I mean,
regularly, as recently as this Sunday gone, the police were at my house. They continue to protect a network of. It's interesting, really, because the way in which the Labour Party operates in towns such as mine, in the ethnic minority communities, in the Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Muslim communities, whatever lens you want to, identity lens you want to use, they have a strange partnership with 2 types of people. One is, I call them the cartels. So these are families within those communities who have direct links with organized crime. They're not even hiding it, direct links with organized crime. And then there is this growing number of Islamists. And both those factions have come after me and consistently come after me, not because I've criticized either of them, but because I've questioned and brought to public attention the way in which politics works in a town such as mine, and why effectively the country, it's not just my town, the country is being held to ransom by a small demographic of people. And I think if I look at it now and I look back, they're in a right mess, Peter. The Labour Party are in a right mess because they're being blackmailed, effectively being blackmailed by a group of people who control somewhere between 80 and 100, constituencies.
Yes, yeah. But also, isn't it, I mean, just to go on quite quickly, obviously now we have what you might call sectarian Muslim MPs.
I call them Islamists. I'm clear what they are. These are Islamists.
And then 5 if you include Corbyn. The point, therefore, is that haven't the Labour Party, therefore, miscalculated rather badly? I mean, they're not needed anymore by the Muslims.
And this is what I think Keir Starmer did immediately after the Southport troubles. He came out and immediately talked about the need to protect the Muslim community. If you follow it through, one of the first things he did was talk about the need to protect the Muslim community. What they are trying to do, and when I mean they, the Labour Party, they're trying to reassert their influence over the Muslim communities by saying, if we don't take care of you, these racist white folk are going to come and get you.
Yes, yes.
So that's the game being played by the Labour Party to counter the Islamists, is to say, okay, you can elect Islamist MPs if you want, but they haven't got the power to take care of it. We've got the prime minister on side. We've got senior government ministers on side, and we will take care of it. So they're trying to outflank the Islamists, and they're using the legitimate concerns, grievances in the wider community as thinking, okay, that's just as they turned the other way to white working class girls being abused, now they're using that same approach on a wider demographic of working class communities. And if you step back and look at it, you can see the game being played out.
Yes. Can you just, to go back in time a bit now, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, actually, Raj? I mean, you're of Bangladeshi heritage, you're not, and you're still a Muslim, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have thought, therefore, as a Muslim, there would be a particular anger, put towards you from the wider community. Is that right?
From the wider white community? No,
from the wider Muslim.
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And what I say to these people from my own community, I mean, I was raised in that community, so some relationships outweigh any anger that they might have, because they can't disown me in the same way as that perhaps some of them would want to, because, I grew up with them. I looked after their mothers when they were ill. I went to people's funerals, weddings, all that sort of stuff. So I'm embedded in the community I come from. So it's very difficult for them to ostracize me. They've tried. The Islamists have tried. They describe me as a gay Christian convert repeatedly, complete fabrication, with a view, and put my address online with a view of trying to have me killed. Effectively, is what they want to do. But the way the story I tell the people in my sort of ethnic community, my religious community, I look at them and say, we need to be part of the solution. Because if we are not part of the solution, where does that leave us? And where will it take us? What do we want? Because no one I speak to would in any way support the systematic sexual abuse of 100,000 children or more, because the government won't tell us the numbers.
We probably will never know.
And agreed. And I said to him, well, be part of the solution. Stop being played. Oh, what about the white grooming gangs? I said, what about the white grooming gangs? The white grooming gangs are prosecuted when we come across them. Here, they're consistently hidden and covered up. This is political. And these are racially motivated crimes. Oh, you can't say that. Well, they are. You speak to the victims. They're very clear as to what these men said to them once they abused them. Yes. You look at the court transcripts, the ones that are available, and it's very clear how the perpetrators legitimize what they did.
Oh, it's entirely clear. I mean, they make no bones about it. They were targeting them because they were white working class girls, and they considered them subhuman. And the degradation, I think people still don't quite get it. I interrupted you there, but just give us an idea of how you grew up, where you grew up.
Absolutely, I'm the product of a second marriage, and maybe this is why I find myself in it being able to champion what I champion and talk this way. My father arrived in 1944, 1945. He was sent off to serve in the Second World War. So he walked from a village in Sylhet all the way to Calcutta, enlisted in the Navy, served in the Navy, and the boat landed in Liverpool and kicked him off and told him to make his own way home. So it wasn't as easy back then. He married someone local. I have half sisters who are half English. You'd be ethnically English, and then him and his wife separated. He looked after all the daughters, so all the daughters stayed with him. And once the last of them was old enough to leave, then he went and met my mother and married her, and she came here, and I was born here. I was born in Bradford in 1973. They moved to Oldham. My first memories are of a very traditional working class estate, a neighborhood community, cobbled streets, elderly white women who had raised me just as much as the two Polish guys, and that was it. There was racism there, but it wasn't in this way, because what I saw and witnessed as a child, and it framed my entire outlook on life, is that we are stronger when we work together. And I was raised by a very mixed community. My entire childhood and upbringing was in such a mixed environment. And I look back and I'm horrified at how increasingly segregated our country has become, how increasingly sectarian it has become.
Yes, yeah. I mean, when you mentioned the 1970s, and I suppose into the 80s, quite mixed. That's gone, right?
Yeah, and it's a shame because you'd figure it out.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their prejudices. Everyone starts in a certain place. But by having positive interactions with each other and living next door to each other, you figure things out. And that's gone, Pete. It's gone. And I'd argue it's been a strategy that's took it away from us.
Yeah. But politically speaking, if you can call what you're doing now political, I mean, how long have you been involved politically in things in general?
Well, in terms of this sort of stuff, 6 years, I'd say.
Before that.
But before that, I mean, I spent the best part of 15 years specialising in what you'd call counter-extremism work. Right. I sat in government task forces when David Blunkett was Home Secretary. So you can go back to
David Blunkett.
When David Blunkett was Home Secretary, I sat on a government task force as far back as that on what was then community cohesion. I wrote raising concerns in 1997 on the rise of what we now accept as Islamist extremism and the increasing and the consequences of our failed multicultural strategy, and that goes back to 1997. So, best part of 30 years, I'd say. Yeah.
Were you perceived, therefore, as a troublemaker? I mean, in some ways, because you were questioning these things. Was that how you were perceived?
The Tony Blair's Labour government took me in as part of the solution and trying to help them frame what the solution was. Yes. But at a local level, yes, 100%.
Yeah,
because there was an arrangement in place.
Yeah.
In every town and city at a local level, there was an arrangement in place between what was, and I keep saying the Labour Party because that's what the dominant party is in these multicultural sort of communities. And there was an arrangement in place where the local white politicians would take care of the Asian politicians, usually at the expense of the white working class. And over a period of time, the Asian politicians, the Pakistani and Bangladeshi politicians, communities decided they could represent themselves.
Yeah.
And you've seen that transition take place where those white politicians have been replaced by Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslim politicians who are more than happy just to represent and champion for their own community needs. And you're seeing now move on to the next level where they're not satisfied with just being in charge of council seats. They want the MP seats. And you've seen the four sectarian Islamist MPs. Yeah. No, why do we need the Labour Party when we can represent ourselves?
Exactly. Could you give us an idea, Raja, of how these kind of networkings work when it comes to the road gangs? I mean, because we've got the police, we've got social services under the council, local politicians. The way it's portrayed in the media, and of course, there is obviously a lot in this, is that they sort of wholesale just simply ignored it. But it's not just simply ignoring it because it's politically kind of ideologically inconvenient, is it? It's about votes too, isn't it?
And that's what I've always maintained. And I'm so, if there is a win in the journey we've been on and the latest interest in this subject is people now are accepting the position that I've been shouting about. This isn't about maintaining community relations. This isn't even about ignoring the needs of working class white girls and thinking, they've made lifestyle choices and all the horrible things that they used to describe. This was a calculated exchange. And that calculated exchange was looking the other way. And in return for looking the other way, those who control the votes in that community continue to provide the votes in that community to the Labour Party. 100%.
How did it work then on a practical level?
On a practical level, okay. So there was a guy in Rochdale, the most infamous of the grooming gang leaders was a man called Shabir Ahmed. He was known as Daddy. He's due out of prison, I think, next year, but he served 22 years in prison. At a local level, Daddy was employed by the council. He was employed by the council and seconded to the Pakistani Community Centre. Of course, the Pakistani Community Centre then made sure that the votes went en masse to to whoever the Labour candidate was. And
Was this done through postal vote?
postal vote. So Tony Blair had introduced postal voting for anyone, and very quickly people worked out that all you needed was a signed postal vote. The X left empty, and you'd harvest them, you'd collect them. So you'd collect them via the community centres, you'd collect them via the mosque, you'd collect them via the informal networks that these men operated through. Of course, organised crime moved in. The same sort of network of heroin dealers moved into this area. They know what they've got their own way of doing this, and they can also knock on your door and remind you that you're not registered to postal vote. And would you like to register to postal vote? What are you going to do when someone like that knocks on your door? You're going to sign the form and hand it over because it's not worth the hassle. So the likes of Shabir Ahmed were also prominent members of the Labour Party. They kept it hidden. We exposed it. In fact, it was a senior Labour Party politician who contacted me to tell me, Raja, did you know Shabir Ahmed was one of ours? Regularly out of Michael Meach's office, it was the Labour Party MP, and also a man called Phil Willis, who was removed, I think, from being an MP. He actually got in trouble under the Misrepresentation of People's Act for some of his election leaflets that he produced. So these guys were the kingpin connect, They are supplying the politicians with the votes, coordinating that. The MPs, of course, can say, oh, we didn't know about this, which, the deniability is, of course, there. But the system underneath was heavily dependent on postal votes. And in return, these men wielded power, which is why Shabir Ahmed, 9 times, we forced out of Andy Burnham's investigators that they let him go 9 times.
Really?
Yeah. And the reason they let him go wasn't they missed it. The reason they let him go was because he was protected. And the only reason a man like that could have been protected was because of the political system in which he operated in and the power he held within that.
But how far up do you think people you were talking about local politics? Or actually, no, you've mentioned people who've gone on.
No, this is national. And what we talk about in terms of how postal votes are harvested and the exchange of that, my phone is full of emails from people from Birmingham all the way to Blackburn. In every community where there is a demographic like mine, with the political space, such as what I make reference to, the electoral fraud to take place using harvested postal votes, and I guarantee if you scratch the surface, in most of those places you'll find the grooming gangs operating the same way. Now you can say they're parallel and have nothing to do with each other, and I will say to you, bring on the national inquiry, and you will see exactly what's gone on, and you will see how vital it is that whichever government comes in next to fight, and fights against the Labour administration, they've got to take steps to safeguard our democracy, and they've got to announce reforms in postal voting.
Because you see, if one takes, which I think you should, the kind of rounded picture of this, I can't help feeling that this, well, for me anyway, this absolutely strikes at the very heart of our state, our democracy. It sort of completely delegitimizes it seems to me.
100%. And I say to people, the grooming gangs, as horrific they are, and they are horrific, they're a symptom of an underlying disease. And that underlying disease is how our electoral system, the very foundations of our democracy, have been infiltrated. Yeah. I have no other word, Peter, to use. It's how it's been infiltrated. And now we've got a party in government who are effectively held to ransom by a small demographic, and they're stuck. If you look at someone like Angela Rayner, in the lead up to the general election, she's very modestly dressed, sat in a room full of Pakistani men.
That's right. I mean, actually, in a situation she wouldn't tolerate in any other, to be, she would be saying, "Where are the women? Where are the women?" Yeah. But you see, when say the whole thing came out, it's been coming out, has it not, for years, bit here, a bit there, but they're never quite taken seriously in the way that it should have been. Until along comes Elon Musk, and then, I know you thanked him, haven't you, for actually sort of really majorly publicising it.
Without him, and this is a travesty on our own democracy and our own media. It's our failing that it took an American, on the X platform to call this out for what it was. Because until then, they'd managed it, Peter.
Yes.
You can talk about it to your 500,000 viewers. I can talk about it. Someone else can talk about it. But the mainstream media still refuses to engage in this in the way they should do and have a responsibility to do. So Elon Musk coming and doing that has completely, created this space where Jess Phillips came under so much pressure. And of course, she then flipped it round and tried to say, oh, she's a victim in this. No, she's not a victim in this. This is the Minister for Safeguarding Children writing a letter back to my council in Oldham saying that she doesn't want to safeguard children. And this was after a 5-year campaign of removing Labour Party politicians after removing Labour Party politicians, where we changed the balance of power in the town that forced the council to write to the government for intervention.
Yes. Speaking of the government reaction now to, so the whole thing blows up recently. Government forced to react. What they've basically come out with, is it not the case, 5 local inquiries or something? Now, you can tell me, to me it seems like you're asking people to mark their own homework, but, why is this so inadequate?
Well, it's worse than that. First of all, Yvette Cooper, you've got to understand some of the context of what's took place. We removed a Labour Party leader in our town. Her name is Amanda Chadderton. We campaigned and lawfully had her removed because she stood up in a council chamber and said, you can't say it destroyed their lives. She had the audacity to stand up and say, you can't say it destroyed their lives, when she voted down a call for a public inquiry. We used that to remove her. Yvette Cooper gave her a job. Took her on as a campaign manager. So straight away, the leader of the council, neck deep in the cover-up, we democratically remove her and the Labour Party take care of her. I think that shows you what's really going on here, where they take care of their own and they need to keep a lid on this. She then comes along and says 5 areas, local inquiry. She knows full well that a local inquiry does not have the statutory powers. And she knows full well that every local inquiry previously that's took place in any capacity has failed because it does not have the statutory powers.
Yeah.
And then she also knows that there's more than 5 local areas where this has taken place. So it's completely outrageous what she's suggesting. And she's brought in, the KC, a guy called Tom Crowther, to oversee it all, who was responsible for the report in Telford. Go and read that report. You'll see he acknowledges he couldn't get to the truth. So the King's Counsel himself is saying, I couldn't get to the truth because I didn't have the powers. And he had £8 million on just one town at that time. Yvette Cooper has given £5 million for 5 different areas. It's taking every one of us for fools.
Yeah. So obviously, you would want totally a national inquiry. What do you think? What would you say to people who say, "Oh, but that's not good enough because it kicks it into the long grass"? How would we stop that happening?
Well, how do you stop anything else happening? You hold those who were responsible, you identify them and you put them in prison. That's how it works in this country.
It doesn't need to go on for years, does it?
No. You put people in, and you can identify and keep putting people in prison as you go along. But there are a number of layers to this. First and foremost are the men who committed the crimes. In Manchester, a network of 97 men were identified by Greater Manchester Police. Matter of public record. The police shut down the investigation. They sat down with the council and shut down the investigation. The minutes of the meeting of how that investigation was shut down has gone missing.
Right.
So the system has covered up, and we need to hold to account, identify and hold to account not just the perpetrators, but also those who are complicit in closing down these investigations. And then on top of that, a layer of politicians now that have emerged who are complicit and partners in the cover-up.
Isn't it right to say that there hasn't been a single prosecution of any official in any branch?
No. In Rochdale, I think they identified 4 police officers for serious, professional inadequacies. And by the time that was finished, they had a written warning or something.
In fact, actually, just before we started filming this, the stories has come up of two West Yorkshire policemen who actually I think they've been arrested for historic sexual abuse. So there's the actual police doing it.
I've read the story, and it appears as though there are 2 police officers, at least, now they've identified, who were partners with the grooming gangs. That seems to be the allegation.
Yeah.
And it's worrying, isn't it?
Yes.
Because if you go and look at the testimonies of the children who were abused, they repeatedly talk about how the police held them with contempt.
Yeah. I mean, what did you make of, national inquiry is not apparently happening, right, at the moment. Let's hope we can keep this alive, so that it does. But what do you make of the general political response after Elon Musk, basically put the kind of global spotlight on it? What, the party responses, all of the political responses, were you encouraged or not?
It was disappointing. It felt like a bandwagon. And it was an opportunity to kick the government and make it political. This should transcend all political parties. I think I looked at Kemi Badenoch, and at least, to give her some credit, at least she raised it, and at least she stood up in Parliament and talked about the systemic abuse of children across the country. And she also made reference to how the cover-up was in part because of the senior politicians in the Labour Party who were incriminated in what took place. Now, I'm clear on who was incriminated. There's a whole, and the ones I've named, I'm sure if you go into other towns and cities, the situation will be identical because this was systemic, this was cultural, this was institutional.
Yeah.
We talk about an institutional culture. Well, the institutional culture in our political establishment was to cover this up. So on that, I'm like, okay, at least, as disappointed as I am, at least they've done so. It's more than anything's ever been done before, Peter.
Yes.
Now, for someone like me who's been campaigning on this for a long time, as frustrated as I am, I have to accept that it's more now than has ever been done before. We had a vote in Parliament. Where our government voted against a public inquiry into the cover-up of the gang rape of children across our nation. At least we got to a vote.
Yes.
And at least we forced the Home Secretary to react and respond with what she's done. But now it feels as though you're waiting for the opposition to come back because they know this isn't good enough. They must know this isn't good enough. And they must know that if we are united as a nation on one issue, regardless of if you're on the right or the extreme right or however they want to describe us, what sort of nation looks the other way to the cover-up of the systemic abuse of hundreds of thousands of its own children?
Well, quite. I mean, it's unspeakable. I mean, what it reveals is extremely alarming about attitudes. One of which I would say, and I don't know whether you would agree with it here, is you cannot underestimate as well the general disdain and snobbery that exists across the board towards white working class people, and these girls, wouldn't you say?
I think in the hierarchy of race, the demographic that mattered the least is the white working class. And within that subset, that mattered even less is white working class girls. And they were abandoned. We failed them. And our system, our society failed them. And why? Because people in power decided that this group of individuals, powerless, it was okay to exchange them for power. I guarantee you that if this had happened to girls from my community, in terms of the Muslim community, Bangladeshi community, Pakistani, however you describe it, there would be national outrage.
You mean if it had been white guys doing it?
Because a white men had been going around, and there would be national outrage. And yet what they also did, and I think this is also intentional, is they framed it in such a way where these communities who are politically disenfranchised to start off with, if you go into any of these areas, you'll see voting is so low, they manipulated them where they went to the far right and it became framed as a far right issue. And then, to my shame, when I first came across it, Peter, I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
This is me as a professional who's worked in this world when I first came across it, the lens in which I first looked at it, it's a far right conspiracy. Oh, and then, Raja, don't say anything about that. Your career will be ruined because you'll be put alongside the guys that are the genuine far right and the racists.
Yes.
Hold on, forget that. There are children being abused. Who cares about the politics and the optics of this? But they did that on purpose. This, that framing was done on purpose.
Well, look, I mean, Raja, what does the immediate future hold there? I mean, obviously, you're going to continue campaigning for a national inquiry. How do you go about that, apart from doing shows like this?
We've launched a campaign. We're trying our best. I'm a grassroots campaigner. In the end, I'm a campaigner.
Yes.
We launched a campaign where we are encouraging councils across the country to declare what's called call an extraordinary council meeting with a single motion. That motion is demanding a national inquiry where they write to the government. So we're urging every council across the country to call an extraordinary council meeting and write to the Home Secretary saying this isn't good enough, we want a national inquiry. And this includes the towns and cities where the grooming gangs operated and also those where it didn't, because we all have a responsibility.
Is there a name for the campaign? Or?
No, I've just got a letter, I've sent it out and people are using it. I will send it to you and
please, because I'm sure there are people. We also have a lot of branches, NCF locals around the country.
Please, I'll say, because... And
we really would like to be involved.
No, and it needs everyone. It needs all of us to do this. And in the end, they are not as powerful as they think they are. We have the power to inform and influence what our government does.
Yes. Well, so thank you very, very much for talking to us about that.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you.
We do have just a little bit more for our members, if you'd stay with me. But in the meantime, thank you very, very much indeed, Raja Miah, for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. We will certainly follow up on the letter that Raja actually mentioned there. See you next week, but in the meantime, do have a good week, won't you? Bye-bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.